Here is Immortal Moments for explanation. Friends, like videos and subscribes to our channel. Tales of Herding Gods episode 110 explanation. So let's start our explanation. Qin Mu's thoughts went into disorder. Qin Hanjun, Qin Fengqing? The family register that he had found in the study room had recorded the people of founding emperor's bloodline, and on the last page of the family register was the sentence, 107th generation, son of Hanjun, Fengqing. Qin Fengqing was the son of Qin Hanjun. So what did the words from the weird thing that slithered down from the tree mean? Who was she calling Qin Hanjun? And who was the Qin Fengqing that she mentioned? Qin Mu's body trembled, and his face turned pale, bloodless. He was Qin Fengqing, and the man in the tree was Qin Hanjun. The last person in the family register of founding emperor was none other than him, and the man in the tree was his father. This person who had fused with this ancient tree was his father? Was he the kin that he had been longing for every day? His closest kin. Why had he become like this? Qin Mu repeatedly told himself to stay calm, since old Ma had once told him to never lose his composure no matter what he encountered. He needed to stay level-headed. Even if came face to face with an apocalypse, he could find a way to survive in a sure death situation if only he kept his calm. Cripple had also once told him to always maintain his smile and stay positive. It was not only to numb the enemies but to also keep his own spirits up. Even if a leg was chopped off, he always had to show his most sincere smile. Only then would he have a chance to escape. Granny Sai had also once said that no matter if his heart was plagued by darkness or a devil, he needed to stay strong. Once he was messed up, everything would be over. However, even if danger was close to Qin Mu, he couldn't compose himself. When his father, his closest kin that he had never met before, had entered such a state, he couldn't do what old Ma, Granny Sai, and Cripple had told him. Qin Mu tried his best to compose himself and not think about the man in the tree or even care about him. He suppressed the trembling of his body. Suddenly, he felt a slight pain in his palms. He had subconsciously gripped his fists so tight that his nails stabbed into his palms, bringing out blood. Qin Mu raised his head and looked at the mysterious entity that was slithering down. It was half a snake and half a human that had an extremely huge body. Even though the lower half was that of a snake, it had no scales. The upper half of the body was that of a woman. She was very beautiful and alluring, but the voice that came from her mouth belonged to a man. Her body left a trail of the sticky liquid. She looked like the form of Saturn sovereign that Qin Mu transformed into, but her form was much more primitive. There seemed to be something like two flesh membranes growing on the back of her neck, and when she spoke, they would open up like two fans stabbing on the sides of her neck, going over her head and trembling continuously to create the sounds. She seemed to not be able to open her mouth to speak. Instead, she relied on the trembling of the flesh membranes to make noise. Because of that, her voice was very weird and cryptic. The flesh membranes had to be her vocal cords, and on their tips were bone spikes that were 2 feet long and looked like javelins. When the membranes opened, 2 pictures of black eyeballs would be revealed, which seemed like 2 strange eyes. According to what Qin Mu knew, there were 2 forms of Saturn sovereign. The first kind was a simple Saturn sovereign's form that didn't have Gate of Heaven influence or the scripture in hand. The other kind was Qin Mu's one, which had Gate of Heaven influence behind him and a scripture in his hand. However, the strange life form in front of him had a form that was even more primitive. It didn't look like she had cultivated this form but was born in it. This was a life form of Yudu that might even be a god. She and the owner of the eyes that were 900 yards apart were 2 different people. You and I made a promise, Qin Hanjun. She slithered to the bottom of the tree and coiled around it. Her alluring face closed in on the face of the man in the tree and rubbed her head against his. The flesh membranes behind her neck trembled and gave off a sound as she laughed. You and I made the pact of Earth count that as long as you find your son named Qin Fengqing, you will let go of everything and follow me to Yudu, handing over the location of Carefree Village. Now that you have found him, your wish is achieved and it's time to fulfill your promise. The man in the tree didn't move, his gaze still on Qin Mu's body. His corporeal body had already turned into wood, and his eyes could no longer see the person in front of him clearly. Yet tears were still flowing out from them. The strange life form surrounded the body of the ancient tree and left the man alone for a moment. As she slithered around leisurely, her voice floated over erratically. When you barged into Yudu world and broke the ceiling barrier, you were left only with a last breath, so you merged with this divine tree. This was for no other reason than to meet with your son, so you exhausted all you could to preserve your life. I came here and accompanied you. In time, you promised me that as long as you meet your son, you will be able to let go of everything, no matter if it's your life or Carefree Village. You'd be willing to hand over your soul to Earth Count as well as the location of Carefree Village. I agreed to your terms, which was why I didn't take your life. Her face suddenly hung down from the divine tree and landed in front of Qin Mu's face. Her huge body circled around him, and she released a strange laugh. Could you be thinking of going back on your word after seeing your son? Do you want to see your son die in front of you? He, such a delicious body, such a young life. He's only 16 years old, am I right? He must be tender and juicy. Cold sweats broke out on Qin Mu's forehead, and he suddenly executed Overlord Body 3 Elixir technique to operate Saturn Sovereign's Earth Marquis True technique, transforming into the form of Saturn Sovereign. With a hoarse voice, he said, "This senior, I'm also. You also have a Saturn Sovereign's form?" The strange Yudu life form suddenly stretched her snake body and slithered away from the body of the towering tree, landing back on the ground. Yet her long tail was still coiled around the tree and not completely off. Looking down at this miniature youth in front of her, she let out a playful smile. What a pitiful little thing, how laughable and immature you are to show off this trick in front of me. Don't you know? Saturn Sovereign's form is merely imitating me. I am none other than Saturn Sovereign. She bent her body down to Qin Mu's face, expecting to see fear on the face of this youth. She wanted to see uneasiness and despair after his knowledge has been destroyed. Qin Mu tried his best to stay composed, but she still saw the fear deep in his heart. Saturn Sovereign raised her head in satisfaction and smiled. What an interesting little man, trying his best to be like an adult yet looking so cute from not knowing anything. Didn't you say a Yudu phrase when you boarded the ship? You only know that single Yudu phrase, right? That phrase is Gate of Heaven influence. Did you really think I would have retreated just because of hearing this phrase and allow you to board the ship? Qin Mu suppressed the trembling of his body. In front of a godlike Saturn Sovereign, all his schemes were useless. Like what she had said, he had always tried his best to be like an adult, a person that could shoulder everything. He learned how the people of the village handled things and learned from what they did, yet in nature, he was still a big boy. In front of Saturn Sovereign, his hard work, his studies, his maturity all seemed laughable. Looking at how you are trying your best to act like an adult, I won't make things difficult for you. Saturn Sovereign returned to the tree, and her tail coiled around the divine tree like a woman clinging to the man she loved. The flesh membranes behind her head opened up and trembled as she smiled. Qin Hanjin, you should be happy that you, father and son, have reunited, so why am I feeling such sorrow from you? That's right, that's because from today onwards, both of you will be separated forever, one living and one dying. Sure, there's no need for you to be like this. She slithered to the man in the tree and looked up at him while talking leisurely. If you say the location of Carefree Village, all your children and clansmen will be free to go to Yudu to accompany you. Truly interesting, a pitiful human dared to make a deal with a god and thought to have struck a bargain, not knowing that he had lost everything. Meanwhile, the chips I had used for the deal were merely your life. She came to the right side of the man in the tree and couldn't resist smiling. Her expression was filled with happiness, and she whispered beside his ear, I used your life in exchange for the lives of everyone in Carefree Village, as well as the life of your son. And you merely got a chance to meet your son for a moment. What a foolish mortal, even if you mastered the power of gods and devils, you were still affected by your foolish thoughts. Like this, you will never achieve the mental state of gods. And because you are bounded by the Pact of Earth Count, you can't go against your oath. The man in the tree regained his composure and opened his mouth. However, since his tongue had already turned into wood, he couldn't make any sound. Saturn Sovereign smiled. What are you trying to say? The man in the tree moved his mouth again, but nothing came out. Saturn's sovereign came closer, wishing to know what he was speaking. She asked curiously, "What are you trying to say?" The man in the tree still couldn't utter a sound. Qin Mu's mental state suddenly calmed down, and he said, "Saturn sovereign, the hearts of father and son are one. I think I know what he is trying to say." Saturn's sovereign took a look at him. He certainly didn't make any sound, yet you could hear. The life of us father and son are in Saturn's sovereign's hand. With this, is Saturn's sovereign still afraid of us playing any tricks? Qin Mu said. Saturn's sovereign looked at him deeply and chuckled. "You guys can't play any tricks. Come over, let's see what he wants to say." Qin Mu went forward and came to the face of the man in the tree. Tilting his head to listen, he said after a moment, "He is saying that his eyes are almost blind so he can't see my face clearly, therefore this doesn't count as seeing me, which is why the Pact of Earth count is still not in effect." Saturn's sovereign was astonished and smiled. "Interesting, I would have never expected you, father and son, to indeed have interlinked intentions. This is troublesome." The forbidden technique he executed fused him with the divine tree, and it is called Spring Comes Upon a Withered Tree, a forbidden technique that borrows life force from others. However, its drawback is also very strong. Not only are the lives interconnected, the same happens even to the corporeal bodies. When your father fought with those gods, he exhausted them to death, but he also exhausted himself to death, thus he had no choice but to extend his life with a forbidden technique. Now, only his face is yet to completely turn into wood, so reversing this process is very difficult, but not for me. After all, I'm from Yudu and control life. The flesh membranes behind Saturn's sovereign's head opened up and revealed the pictures of the eyes. Two beams shot out from them and hit the body of the man in the tree. Gradually, the wood on the surface started to shed off, and the vein lines on the skin of his neck no longer looked like grains of a tree. The beams that shot out from the eye pictures on the flesh membranes behind Saturn's sovereign's head suppressed the lignification of the man in the tree. Once the wooden nature in the body was suppressed, the eyes would be able to see. The face of the man in the tree broke free from the tree bit by bit, and the wooden nature of his tongue also gradually faded. Swoosh! The picture of the eyes on the flesh membrane behind Saturn's sovereign's brain closed, and she said, "Qin Hanjun, you should be able to see your son now, right?" She was very careful and knew that the man in the tree was extremely powerful. He was no inferior to her at his peak, so she didn't completely undo the forbidden technique on his body. She only allowed his eyes to be able to clearly see what's in front of them. The man in the tree shut his eyes closed and opened his mouth, however, there were still no sounds. Qin Mu tilted his ears to listen and nodded repeatedly. After a moment, he said, "What he meant is that Saturn's sovereign had guessed something wrong." Saturn's sovereign tilted her head and sneered, "What did I guess wrong?" The man in the tree opened his eyes. They still couldn't see anything, and the skin on his face was rapidly lignifying. However, the roots of the divine tree were trembling. Qin Mu's expression regained its composure. "What Saturn's sovereign guessed wrongly is that he didn't want to see me and fulfill the Pact of Earth count. For it to happen, he's willing to never see me. His aim was just to have Saturn's sovereign help him suppress part of the wooden nature so he could regain a portion of his mobility." Saturn's sovereign sneered, and the flesh membranes behind her head trembled. "Is this what Qin Hanjun wants to say or what you want to say? Boy Fengqing, are you too conceited and overestimate your own abilities? So what if Qin Hanjun regains a fraction of his movement? His divine sword has already broke, and when relying on just a small body part, he is absolutely not my opponent." Qin Mu shook his head and said, "This is what I want to say, but also what he wants to say. Even gods and devils can't control everything. There will always be some life forms which are unwilling to accept their fate and try to jump out. He isn't totally unable to fight back. Because I've brought him his sword." Behind Qin Mu's back, Snow Bright sword light rushed into the sky. Carefree sword had shattered the wooden sword sheath, and a huge wooden hand grew out from the divine tree. Sword light instantly filled the entire hall, and everywhere in front of Qin Mu's eyes became snow white. He couldn't see anything at all. This was a sword skill that was close to the path. It surpassed his understanding and was beyond his scope. The sword exploded with world-shaking power and rays. The broad and powerful divine lights shone as sword lights and mercury flooded the ground. They then flooded the sky, and in an instant, what Qin Mu saw was no longer the sword. Instead, he saw the sorrows, joys, partings and reunions of a person, their lifetime pursuits and the will with no regrets. The sword and path had fused into one. Village Chief's sword picture, Dao Sect's Dao sword, all these legendary sword skills lost their color in front of this. Within the sword light, Saturn's sovereign's cry of astonishment rang out, and Qin Mu could feel the overflowing divine power. Intense heat waves came sweeping over, followed by boundless pressure as if he was being crushed by the vast and incomparably thick land. He saw a huge orange-yellow star that possessed vast and mighty power, looking like it was going to crush everything in sight. Saturn's sovereign stood in front of that huge star, overflowing with imposing might. Qin Mu's eyes began to burn then, and he immediately shut them closed. He felt the overflowing divine power weaken rapidly as Saturn's sovereign quickly went away. After that, there was the sound of the door slamming. Qin Hanjin, Qin Fengqing, I'll definitely come back to find you, father and son, the weird voice of Saturn's sovereign echoed from farther and farther away. With a loud bang, the treasured ship swayed violently. Saturn's sovereign had to have escaped. ZHNNG. There was a humming sound, and Qin Mu secretly opened his eyes. The sword lights that had filled the space just then had vanished, and Carefree sword was stabbed right in front of him with the hilt of the sword still vibrating. Below the sword was a pool of god blood which was giving off multicolored divine lights that were very astonishing. Qin Mu turned around and saw the face of the man in the tree. The lignification gradually faded away, but he still kept his eyes shut tight. He wasn't willing to open them. If he did that, the Pact of Earth Count would be activated. Earth Count would then take his soul, and Carefree Village would be revealed. His kin would all die because of it. Qin Mu stared blankly. Could he never open his eyes to see him? Am I called Qin Fengqing? Qin Mu asked in a low voice while looking at the man in the tree. Village chief gave me a name of Mu. Qin Mu, the cowherd boy with the surname Qin. He leaned against the tree and said in a low voice, from that moment onwards, I've always been called Qin Mu. Only now did I learn that my parents had already given a name to me, Fengqing. It's a little unfamiliar. You my father. The man still kept his eyes shut, but a branch grew out from the tree. A tender leaf took form on it and gently stroked Qin Mu's head. He leaned against the tree in silence as hundreds of emotions burst forth in his heart. No one had ever touched him like this before. Apothecary wouldn't, as he didn't like kids. When he was concocting his medicine, he would either grab the young Qin Mu to put him in the medicinal cauldron by a hand or a leg. Blind wouldn't as well. Even if Qin Mu executed the best staff skill, Blind would only nod and give a look of praise, but he would never spoil him. Granny Sai had never brought up a child before, being forced to wash and change his diapers every day. Only when Qin Mu had grown up a bit and helped her do the chores and tailoring that she sometimes praised him. Old Ma, who was the strictest, never praised anyone. When he saw Qin Mu, he was always reminded of his dead children, so his face was always very grim, thus he never even smiled. Death, on the other hand, would always find him annoying, in all shapes and forms. When he was painting, he would always chase Qin Mu out. Even when he was teaching Qin Mu how to read, write, and paint, he would mostly smack his hands and seldom praise him. Mute was always naughty and found all kinds of methods to play tricks on him, entertaining himself with this. Cripple would usually bring him along to steal stuff or just steal from him. He had a childish heart and treated Qin Mu as a partner. As for Village Chief, he had no arms or legs, and he was also a gloomy fellow. Even though he smiled frequently, he was plagued with lots of matters of the heart. No one had ever touched Qin Mu's head like this, not even a cold and dead branch. This was a feeling he had never felt before. Qin Mu tilted his head up to look at the sky at an angle, trying to not let his tears cover his vision. In the past, he always wanted to be like an adult, as the adults in the village were his role models. He learned from their characters and followed them in how they handled affairs. However, at this moment, he felt like he was a little child that should have been used to being by his parents. The divine tree he was leaning against was very durable, and although its bark was slightly painful to press on, his heart was at peace, as tranquil as it had ever been. It was as if he had returned to the safe bay called home. The old man from the painting came out from nowhere and looked around before sneaking into the tree. Raising his head to look, he didn't know why was this place so quiet. "You are very good." A hoarse voice came from the divine tree as if the wooden man had opened his mouth to speak. Each word was said with difficulty and no emotions could be heard from them, yet Qin Mu's body shuddered. "You are very good." This was the voice of the man in the tree, and he seemed like he only knew this phrase. He seemed like he hadn't praised a child before and couldn't think of anything else to say. The reason he said that was because Qin Mu had understood his intentions. The father and son were interlinked, and Qin Mu could understand what he was saying. However, at that point in time he couldn't even make a sound, so how could he have said anything? Yet Qin Mu had guessed his intentions and lured Saturn Sovereign into making a move, suppressing part of his wooden nature and allowing him to execute his magic power. Qin Mu had then leaned over to give him a chance to grab the sword, using words at the same time to mess up the mental state of Saturn Sovereign. This created another chance, and this one was to strike. Qin Mu revealed a smile and said in a low voice, "We are father and son, and even though we have never met before, I feel like there are ways in which we are similar. I have made the pact of earth count with others before and know the shenanigans of it." The man in the tree gave a sound of acknowledgement. Qin Mu lay there and enjoyed the rare tranquility. After a long time, a flower bloomed on the tree and a fruit was born. It dropped off the tree and landed in his hand, its fragrance assaulting his nostrils. Parents were all like this, always worrying that their children wouldn't have enough to eat or would not be warm. Qin Mu lifted the fruit up and suddenly asked, "Where did mother go? Is she still alive? I will go find her." The man in the tree said in a difficult-to-understand voice, "She brought you and the clansmen to Yudu." Qin Mu was stunned. Granny Sai had found him at the side of surging river outside disabled elderly village that was in great ruins. She didn't find him in Yudu. So how did he get to great ruins? What had happened back then? How do I go back to Carefree Village? Qin Mu then asked. The man in the tree continued to keep his eyes shut while replying in a cryptic voice, "Elder Painting will bring you to the study room, there's something inside that I've left for you. Go, we shall never meet again." Every word he said was uttered with difficulty, and each one was like a stab to the throat. Qin Mu's heart tightened and crumbled. Father and son will never meet again? The old man from the painting waved at him and signaled for him to pull out Carefree sword. Qin Mu composed himself and went forward to pull out Carefree sword which was stuck in the ground. The old man in the painting then waved at him again and motioned for him to follow him. Qin Mu turned his head back, but the eyes of the man in the tree were still shut. He didn't open his eyes. Elder Painting had to have some sort of connection with the man in the tree. As for what kind of connection it was, Qin Mu had no idea. Maybe it was the man in the tree that had bestowed life to him. Can't father and son meet again? Qin Mu asked loudly. The man in the tree still had his eyes tightly shut, and his voice sounded a bit heartless when he said, "No. I will save you." Qin Mu turned around and went after the old man from the painting while shouting in a loud voice, "Isn't it just earth count? I'll get rid of him, so wait for me." The divine tree remained motionless, but after a while, the man in the tree slowly opened his eyes and tears rolled down from them. He heard Qin Mu's footsteps outside the room. This youth was saying to the old man from the painting in a low voice, "Elder Painting, after I leave, help me take care of him." In the study room of the treasured ship, Elder Painting moved and came to the front of the bookshelf. The books there had all been taken by someone, leaving only a clean bookshelf. Pan Gong So, this scoundrel, coming to rob my house. Qin Mu was furious. Suddenly, Elder Painting tunneled into a painting and waved toward him from inside. Qin Mu hesitated for a moment before walking over. What followed was something marvelous. He discovered that he actually walked into the painting and became a man in the painting. There, a man in white stood as if waiting for him to arrive. It was Qin Mu's first time encountering such a strange incident as walking into the world inside a painting. This path of painting was different from Def's path of painting. Def's paintings transformed his paintings into reality. For example, if he painted a storm and shook the painting, a storm would erupt in reality. Once, he painted the 18 levels of hell, and the entire heavenly painting Imperial City suddenly crumbled, transforming into the 18 levels of hell. This was how his paintings affected reality. The painting in which Qin Mu had walked into was a complete opposite. It allowed him to enter the painting, and when he did so, he became part of the painting. However, when he went inside, he discovered that it wasn't a two-dimensional world. It was three-dimensional, and there was a very vast space around. This is another kind of painting path. Qin Mu thought to himself after examining his surroundings. If Def's painting allowed his brush strokes to invade reality, then this painting path developed a world internally. If these two paths were to ever complement each other and fuse, the height of the painting path could be brought to an unimaginable elevation. Qin Mu pondered. If one achieved this step, with the rays of a brush, storms would sweep through a battlefield and bombard countless enemy troops. That storm could then sweep the enemy troops into the painting before raising the brush to erase that painting. This could be the so-called use of one stroke to sweep away a 10,000-men army. Scholar full of pep, full of vim, nothing more than this. Qin Mu pushed away his wandering thoughts. The attainments he had in the path of painting were far inferior to those of Def. This grandpa of his was like an insurmountable mountain which he could only look up to. He felt he should tell this idea to Def and let this existence at the peak of the painting path research these two kinds of painting paths, fusing the two of them into one. He should then learn from Def again, and it would make him succeeded in cultivating these two painting paths quicker. Def was more proficient, so if he was to let him research before learning from him, he could save a lot of time to do other stuff in the meantime. Furthermore, Def's painting path would be able to reach an even higher realm. He looked towards the man in white who had to be the painting of his father, Qin Hanjun. He was once again alive in this world. When he had become the man in the tree, his graceful bearing and demeanor couldn't be seen. Whereas in the painting, Qin Mu could see the elegant manner of his father. The only pity was that this wasn't the real Qin Hanjun, it was just a man in the painting. There was no sound in this world, so the Qin Hanjun there couldn't open his mouth to speak either. He could only do some simple actions like writing and painting. He wasn't the real Qin Hanjun and was only drawn by him. It was drawing bestowed life, just like elder painting. Qin Mu came to his side and saw that he was currently painting the diagrams of Daoyin technique. Qin Mu was slightly stunned. Overlord Body 3 Elixir Technique. The man painting was already a strange thing, yet what he was painting was the Overlord Body 3 Elixir technique that Qin Mu was cultivating. In regards to it, Qin Mu naturally had an extreme appreciation. He had relied on the Daoyin technique as enlightenment to awaken his spirit embryo, which in time resulted in his achievements. The Overlord Body 3 Elixir technique that he had seen before was somewhat different from the Overlord Body 3 Elixir technique he cultivated. He started painting from the first realm of the Daoyin technique, but it was different from what Qin Mu had cultivated. It was much simpler and cleaner. The Daoyin technique of Overlord Body 3 Elixir technique that village chief had taught Qin Mu was considered the most simple and fundamental technique in the world. It was the technique that was the most suitable for ordinary people to cultivate. Yet the Daoyin technique drawn by the man in the painting was even simpler, but it wasn't crude. Qin Mu's current scope was far different from when he was young. He understood the logic that the simpler the fundamentals were, the higher the achievements would be. This was like painting on a white paper. The less thing there was in the foundation, the cleaner the end result would be. The things painted on white could be more exquisite and fine. If one was to draw on a paper on which somebody had already scribbled, it would be difficult to write a fine work or paint a magnificent painting on top of such a foundation, no matter what divine brush was used. The Daoyin technique of the man in the painting was simple to an unimaginable extent. Qin Mu tried to execute his vital qi according to what he saw, and at first, it was slightly sluggish, but with the circulation, it soon became more lively and boundless, reaching his limbs and bones, giving him a feeling of seizing the creation of heaven and earth. If I had had such a Daoyin technique, I'm afraid it would have been even harder to break through the spirit embryo wall. Qin Mu sighed ruefully. When village chief had imparted Overlord Body 3 elixir technique to him, he had to have done some minor adjustments to make it simpler for it to break through the spirit embryo wall. If it was for the better or worse, it couldn't be said. After changing the technique, the spirit embryo wall was much easier to break, but the foundation wasn't as dense as it would have been with the Daoyin technique the man in the painting had drawn. And at that time, the most crucial thing for Qin Mu had been to break through the spirit embryo wall. The man in the painting painted the second diagram, and the second Overlord Body 3 elixir technique was what Qin Mu had seen in the Valley of Doom Suppression Palace. There was little difference between the two diagrams, only minute changes in some places. Qin Mu tried to execute the diagram and instantly felt like his spirit embryo bore the heaven and earth. This heart stirred uncontrollably. The Overlord Body 3 elixir technique that he had learned from Doom Suppression Palace didn't have this feeling. Spirit embryo was the realm of martial arts practitioners. Only by reaching this step could one be considered to have stepped through the door of cultivation. The foundation was extremely important, but passing through the door was extremely important as well. According to Qin Mu's current understanding, spirit embryo divine treasure opened the heaven and earth in his body. As he cultivated and his cultivation became more and more profound, the heaven and earth became more distinguished. The top was heaven and the bottom was earth. The spirit embryo was located in the middle, and below its feet was the spirit platform, breathing in and out the 5 Qi, which was gold, wood, water, fire, and earth. The legs of the spirit embryo stepped on the land, and the body unified the 6 directions, which were heaven, earth, north, south, east, and west. Qin Mu had cultivated to 6 directions realm, and his understanding of these divine treasures was this. As for 7 stars, celestial being, life and death, and divine bridge, his understandings wasn't deep regarding them, but he still had thoughts on them. 6 directions realm could cultivate the primordial spirit, and it grew as the spirit embryo absorbed the soul and vital chi during cultivation, becoming the primordial spirit upon reaching 6 directions realm. When the primordial spirit could leave the body, one would basically be at celestial being realm. Qin Mu had never felt anything wrong with his Overlord Body 3 elixir technique ever since he started cultivating it. Only when he followed the diagrams of the man in the painting did he realize that something was missing. Spirit embryo needed to grow into primordial spirit. If it couldn't bear the heaven and earth in his spirit embryo divine treasure, it meant that his cultivation wasn't there yet. What he was lacking previously might have been this. He then looked at the third diagram. It was for 5 elements realm. The circulation diagram Qin Mu had received back then wasn't complete. He had relied on the wisdom of Patriarch and himself to patch the circulation path. However, a flaw was left behind on his left shoulder. Even though Qin Mu had relied on great educational heavenly devil scriptures to patch it up, there was still some hinders when he executed his technique. It was just that the influence wasn't too big and Qin Mu was too outstanding. He was able to sweep through all the martial arts practitioners of 5 elements realm and even some of the weaker 6 directions realms divine arts practitioners, so he had never dealt into this problem. The circulation diagram of 5 elements realm that the man in the painting drew was a complete one. Qin Mu studied it in detail and let out a sigh of relief. This circulation diagram could finally patch the part that was missing in his technique so no more flaws would remain. The 4th diagram was different from what he was cultivating now. It was more complicated. Qin Mu stared at it blankly. From the first Daoyin diagram, he had noticed something interesting. Comparing the Overlord Body 3 elixir technique that the man in the painting drew and his own Overlord Body 3 elixir technique, the techniques of the formed had a tendency to become more and more complicated. It was like drawing a sapling that had broken out of the soul and only had 2 budding leaves, then slowly showing him grow luxuriant branches and leaves. The Overlord Body 3 elixir technique that he had pieced together was lacking in comparison. It was like a small tree whose one branch grew to the east while the other pointed to the west. Even though it could also become a huge tree, it was quite crooked. Furthermore, the techniques drawn by the man in the painting had no divine arts. Although only the circulation diagrams had been drawn, when Qin Mu executed any divine arts, he had a feeling of being able to use it casually. Suddenly, his heart trembled, and the sound of woodcutter imparting his scriptures on the rock rang out in his brain. The reciting and the Overlord Body 3 elixir technique drawn by the man in the painting combined, and Qin Mu opened his mouth in astonishment. Unity technique had actually overlapped with the Overlord Body 3 elixir technique that the man in the painting had drawn. It was fusion, and overlapping. Unity technique contained the general principles of great educational Heavenly Devil scriptures. It was like the sacred tree that woodcutter had imparted to Heavenly Devil cult founder. Unity technique was the body of an ancient tree, while great educational Heavenly Devil scriptures were its thousands of branches and roots. The previous Heavenly Devil cult masters had all needed to comprehend their own Unity technique. Only then could they unify great educational Heavenly Devil scriptures. Everyone's comprehension of Unity technique was different, not one of them being the same. At this moment, Qin Mu combined the scriptures imparted by woodcutter on the rock and discovered to his astonishment that Unity technique of Heavenly Devil cult was actually the same as Overlord Body 3 elixir technique. He had a feeling that space and time were in disorder. Unity technique of great educational Heavenly Devil scriptures was actually the Overlord Body 3 elixir technique that he had cultivated. Could Heavenly Saint cult be from Carefree Village? In that case, the woodcutter that had imparted his techniques, he had a weird expression. Was his surname Qin as well? He didn't think much about it and continued to look at the paintings in an entranced state. He subconsciously followed the circulation diagram, and there was absolutely no hindrance with his vital qi circulation. It became livelier and smoother with each pass. When the man in the painting drew the 8th diagram, he finished the foundation to Divine Bridge Realm. Qin Mu concentrated on memorizing it, not expecting the man in the painting to not stop. Instead, he continued to draw the 9th diagram. There's still a realm above Divine Bridge Realm. Qin Mu was astonished. Wasn't Divine Bridge Realm the last realm? In that case, what was the realm the 9th circulation diagram was meant for? The 9th diagram was extremely complicated and linked the first 7 great divine treasures. When the vital qi circulated, all 7 great divine treasures had to be mobilized. It could be said to be so complicated that one wrong step could cause qi deviation. Qin Mu concentrated on memorizing it, not daring to be sloppy. Yet there was too much information contained in this 9th diagram. It made him dizzy, and his eyes dimmed. Once the man in the painting finished drawing the 9th diagram, he stopped. After a moment, when Qin Mu had completely memorized all the 9 diagrams, he moved and attacked. Qin Mu immediately defended, and within a few moves, he was dropped to the ground. Once the man in the painting dropped him, he didn't continue to attack. Instead, he waited for Qin Mu to recover before starting over. He's feeding me moves. Qin Mu's eyes lit up. On the deck of the treasured ship, numerous great shamans, shaman kings, and soldiers of barbarian Di Empire were attacking the bridge, while 2 white bats and a dragon Chelene were guarding the door, not letting them in. Pan Gong So was checking the books and treasures he had ransacked so far. These books all have seals, and it'll be slightly troublesome to break them open. I'll have to mobilize the corporeal bodies of my previous lifetimes. Pan Gong So looked at book after book and was somewhat disappointed when he couldn't open even a single one. Looking back at the building on the ship, he thought to himself, it's been 2 months already, and that brat still hasn't come out. Suddenly, the door opened, and Qin Mu popped his bruised head out. When he saw him, he waved, and Pan Gong So rushed after him in a hurry, elated. This brat got beaten so miserably, could he have met the terrifying entity hidden on this ship? Pan Gong So gave chase with a slight suspicion in his heart. But didn't that terrifying entity already run away? When Saturn's sovereign had escaped from the treasured ship, a lot of activity was happening throughout the ship. Pan Gong So was searching through the rooms for his followers that were still scattered. Some of them were still waiting on the deck, but when he came there, the people on the deck had disappeared. They had to have been swept off into Yudu world by the gale which was raised by Saturn's sovereign's escape. This had happened 2 months ago. During this period of time, Pan Gong So had brought everyone to search through all the rooms and collected all the treasures that could be moved. Only when he wanted to ransack the bridge did he meet with a hindrance, the Dragon Chelene and the White Bat brothers. They blocked off the way, making it impossible to enter the room. There was only one door into the bridge, and Pan Gongso would have had to go through it if they wanted to enter the room. However, the two white bats and the dragon Qin were not weak. Once they decided to guard the door, even the Shaman King of Life and Death Realm couldn't break through. Due to that, in the last few days, Pan Gongso had them attacked continuously so they wouldn't be able to get any rest. The moment Pan Gongso barged into a room, he immediately executed 10,000 locusts banner, and numerous locusts started to circle around his body, protecting him. At this moment, the sound of a door closing came from behind him. Qin Mu had stayed next to the door and had just closed it. Pan Gongso rushed forward a dozen steps before turning back with a smile. "Cult Master Qin, why have you lured me here?" The bruises on Qin Mu's face were obvious traces of being thrashed, and his voice was full of resentment. "I had suffered numerous beatings over the past 2 months, and my confidence is severely crippled. Old brother, you should also know, if a person fails too many times without succeeding once, their hearts will become twisted and they will become perverted." Pan Gongso was astonished. What kind of person could actually beat Cult Master Qin into such a state? This is starting to interest me. Other than me, who else in this world can actually defeat Cult Master Qin repeatedly and make him feel such a strong sense of defeat? Could that person be a divine arts practitioner of 7 stars realm? Qin Mu touched the injuries on his face. What he used was his cultivation of 6 directions realm. Pan Gongso was even more astonished and let out a shaky breath as he praised, "This person truly has great abilities." Qin Mu said very sincerely, "Therefore, old brother, I can only take the chance to find you during a break. To prevent my spirit from becoming twisted and my mind from becoming perverted, won't you let me give you a beating?" Pan Gongso's eyebrows drooped, and his gaze fell on the 10,000 locusts banner he was holding. With a low laugh, he said, "Cult Master Qin, I usually don't fight battles that I know I can't win, so I usually use dirty tricks in such situations. However, when I saw you waving at me sneakily, I ran over immediately. Do you know why?" He raised his head. "I have cultivated diligently for the past 2 months and have improved extremely compared to 2 months ago. You also know I'm the Grandmaster of Roland's Golden Palace and have already reincarnated 18 times. 2 months of my cultivation is equivalent to 2 years of your cultivation. I've chased after you not to listen to your rubbish and not to get beaten by you as well. I'm here to kill you." He erupted in fury, and his black hair rushed upwards. Swinging his 10,000 locusts banner, he attacked Qin Mu while shouting sternly, "I'll beat you to death. Hand over that silver helmet and I'll let you die peacefully." Ding, 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 ding. The flying locusts and the sword rain collided. The thin wings of the golden-colored locusts were like knives while Qin Mu's flying swords were incomparably heavy. In that instant, the collisions filled the entire room with sparks shooting off in all directions. Among the sword lights and flying locusts, Pan Gongso stabbed the 10,000 locusts banner onto the ground, and his feet flashed as he moved left and right among the sword rain and flying locusts to close in on his target. Qin Mu's footwork was also changing unpredictably while he closed in on Pan Gongso as well. The room they were in wasn't very large, so with all the places having flying swords and flying locusts clashing with each other, any carelessness would lead to being stabbed or even losing one's life. Qin Mu and Pan Gongso had been researching on how to transform their divine arts to become fine, so due to the room's size, their flying locusts and flying swords were all shrunk to the smallest possible size. The flying swords were no more than 3 inches long, while the flying locusts were no more than 5 fingernails long. The smaller they got, the more dangerous it would become to move through the room. The action would require extremely great eyesight and judgment to avoid the sword rain and the flying locusts. The next moment, the two people exchanged palms and fists, bursting forth with force. A crisp cry of thunder instantly sounded in the room. Pan Gongso revealed a smile. "With my current cultivation. HNNNG." He gave a grunt when he felt the opponent's terrifying strength, astonished. He had cultivated diligently these days, and his cultivation had increased tremendously. Thus, it should have had an overwhelming advantage. Instead, when he exerted his full strength, Qin Mu still had a slight upper hand. How was this possible? Was this brat also someone who had reincarnated? However, he noticed that something wasn't right. Qin Mu hadn't surpassed him in the cultivation of magic power. Instead, his vital qi had become even purer and the way he used his moves and divine arts had improved by a level. Even his corporeal body had become stronger. This meant that Qin Mu could use less vital qi to have his divine arts burst forth with a greater power. He had gone ahead in terms of finesse in his divine arts. When his attacks didn't hit, the power would rarely leak out, while when they did hit, the force of the explosion would be even stronger. Pan Gongsu and Qin Mu had gone into that mysterious corridor together and both of them had seen the markings of the divine arts and divine weapons on the wall. However, both of them had only gained a superficial understanding from the cursory observation and hadn't researched it deeper. Yet Qin Mu had surpassed Pan Gongsu in the attainments of this path. This is bad. Pan Gongsu was stupefied. He had a bad feeling about this. Now that Qin Mu's cultivation had increased and his vital qi had become purer, he would exhaust a lot less magic power. With his corporeal body improving as well, it was obvious that Qin Mu's battle prowess and endurance would both surpass him. Even though it wasn't much, it would be enough for him to achieve victory as long as he was an inch superior. The battle was fine for the moment, but once it dragged out, Pan Gongsu was going to be in deep shit. When their big moves clashed, the 8,000 swords and 10,000 locusts banner both exhausted a great amount of magic power. This made their vital qi deplete at a rapid pace, and so the numbers of flying swords and flying locusts they could control declined. Yet Qin Mu's corporeal body was still going strong as he unleashed his moves and hindered. He split mountains and rocks with his punches and kicks that contained astonishing power, forcing Pan Gongsu to fall back continuously. Suddenly, Pan Gongsu crashed backward and threw open a door on his way there. He took this chance to close the door. Before it could happen, a huge force came bombarding over, blowing him away and smacking him into the wall on the opposite side. I just need to hold on until my subordinates find me. As long as they come, this brat will surely die. Pan Gongsu remained calm. In the past 2 months, he had taught some shaman kings how to calculate the spell of space integration to find the treasures on the ship and that mysterious corridor. Those shaman kings would definitely find their way over. However, the wisdom and algebra of those shaman kings were inferior to his own, so they would definitely take some time to find their way over to him. Thus, he needed to hold on until they did. Qin Mu came whooshing over and attacked him from a distance, engaging in hand-to-hand combat once he was close. The number of flying swords and flying locusts they used in this clash was even lower. Qin Mu controlled 9 swords, each of which was extremely fine as it swam to and fro around his body. Those swords were like flying fish that were the length of a finger. Pan Gongsu's 9 flying locusts were also extremely fine, and they looked like real golden locusts. Even though the 2 fighters' vital qi was severely depleted, their attacks were still extremely fierce. When they were attacking from a distance yet close to each other, any carelessness would result in that person dying. Pan Gongsu dealt with the attacks carefully, but his cultivation was still depleting too rapidly until it was finally exhausted. Qin Mu's cultivation was also exhausted, but his corporeal body was still as strong as a bull. Pan Gongsu could only block over a dozen attacks before his defense was broken. In an instant, his entire face was bruised. Qin Mu pressed him against the floor and beat him until his eyes could no longer open. Pan Gongsu shouted out, "Well done! Come and beat me some more if you have the guts." Qin Mu gave 2 more punches before he heard a door opening. His heart wavered, and he immediately stopped. Pan Gongsu shouted, "Come and beat me some more." Qin Mu put away his flying swords and turned around with a laugh. "Older brother, I'm satisfied, I'll find you another day." "That's right, the Dao Tai sack that's on your waist, I'm taking it." Astonished, Pan Gongsu grabbed towards his waist, his heart turning cold. However, the Dao Tai sack on his waist had already vanished without a trace. He actually didn't realize when Qin Mu had undone it. "My craft is still slightly inferior to that of Grandpa Cripple, otherwise, he wouldn't even know if I had taken off his pants." Qin Mu tossed the Dao Tai sack up before catching it again and sighed to himself about how Cripple's craft was too excellent. "Kill him!" Pan Gongsu's voice sounded out as some shaman kings finally came into the room. Qin Mu revealed a smile and turned around to close a nearby door behind himself. On his way out, he collected the flying swords that were scattered on the ground and placed them back into his Daotai sack. He also picked up the 10,000 Locusts banner. Opening the Daotai sack of Pan Gongso, he looked inside and frowned slightly. The books in the study room weren't there, just all the other treasures from the ship, an incense burner, tea set, candlesticks. Pan Gongso didn't seem to have carried the books with him. What exactly is recorded in those books from the bookshelves? Techniques of gods? Or is it something else? Qin Mu hung the 2 Daotai sacks around his waist and returned to the study room while thinking, when I beat him up the next time, I should ask where he hid the books. Pan Gongso struggled to walk out of the building and come onto the deck. When he saw the gazes of the shaman kings, he knew what they were thinking of him. Once they saw him beaten up to such a state by Qin Mu, their respect for him started to fade. Pan Gongso said indifferently, Cult Master Qin isn't in a good condition as well, he was severely injured by me. I know his name and surname, so when my cultivation recovers, I shall cast a spell to take his life. When his cultivation recovered, he immediately cast his spell. Yet something weird happened. Even though he knew Qin Mu's name and surname, he couldn't find him. It was as if he had vanished from this world. Pan Gongso cast his spell again, but his shaman spell still couldn't find Qin Mu. Impossible, he's clearly on the ship, yet the shaman spell can't find him. Could he be hiding in some secret space which blocks off my spell? Qin Mu returned to the painting, and the man there continued to feed him moves. Even though Qin Mu was still defeated time and time again, he was starting to last longer and longer. Time went without anyone's notice until one day, the treasured ship trembled. Even though Qin Mu was in the world in the painting, he could still feel those tremors. The old man revealed a worried expression and called him over. Qin Mu quickly followed him out and onto the deck. A distance away from the treasured ship, countless Yudu life forms were flooding over. The tremor came from the treasured ship increasing its speed to escape them. The old man from the painting stood on the door and waved at Qin Mu. Qin Mu was stunned. Were they going to part just like this? This video is end here. Like the video and subscribe to my channel.